One, I know it's been a while since I've done this, but I've been doing some things. So, here is part 2. It's been several months since the incident with Nightmare. Ink and Air were still scared about what would happen, now finding out that their baby was blind. But they weren't really worried about it right now. They just wanted to find something to make their son happy, and also Ink found out some very good news. Maybe about a month ago, by what Ink thinks, he found out that he was going to be having a little skeleton himself. Yep, Ink was pregnant at the time, and he was about to surprise Air in a few days on their anniversary. So, a few days before their anniversary, Ink was getting everything together until he heard something. He didn't know what, but he was a little worried. So he decided to go and check it out what it was. Air was at work, so Ink had the entire house to himself with Wyan. He noticed Wyan was fast asleep, so it couldn't have been him. So he decided to go outside and see what that was. He saw something on the ground, and he was starting to get a little freaked out. So he went back in the house and just thought of it was nothing, and locked all the doors to make sure, because Nightmare was still out there. They didn't know if he was coming after them or not after the little incident they had with him last time. A few more days had passed, and after Air found out that he was going to be a father on their anniversary day, something strange started happening. Stuff from their house started disappearing. Just things in general. That's when Air and Ink started to go to the living room and talk. Air was the first to start the conversation.
Ink, I think there might be something terribly wrong. Stuff in our house started disappearing. I'm starting to get really worried.
Me too. I don't know what it could be, but I'm starting to get a little worried too. What if it might be Nightmare? What if he's coming after Wyan again?
Then we'll be ready. But I'm also mainly worried about you. You can't fight in your condition.
It's alright. I'll be fine.
I'm just worried.
I know.
Several weeks had passed and this weird thing started to stop. But then, Air decided to go to work. He had stuff to do, so he had to also continue doing his job, even though he didn't like doing work anymore. He just liked being lazy. But when Air went to work, Nightmare decided to attack then. Nightmare knocked all the lights out of Ink and Air's house, took Wyan, and knocked Ink unconscious, and took him to his castle. By the time Air got back, he noticed something was terribly wrong. He could sense it. He opened the door and noticed it was unlocked. Usually Ink locked the door when he got home. And he saw all the glass all over the floor, and the light bulbs were out. Ink? Ink! Where are you? He started calling out for his husband. Wyan? You here too? And his child. He started getting worried when he noticed that there was nobody in the entire house. Maybe they went out. I hope so. He went into town and started asking if anyone's seen Ink with a baby in his arms. Everybody said they haven't seen Ink at all. They only saw him a few weeks ago, when he had to go pick up the groceries. Then he started getting mad. He went back to his house to see if there was anything that might be of use to find out who took Ink and his child. Then he saw something. it was a envelope with his name on it. He opened it and he was mad. It was from Nightmare. It read, "If you want to get your family back in one piece, come to my castle. I want to finish you off once and for all." Air started getting his stuff together and headed towards Nightmare's castle. By the time he got to Nightmare's castle, he was still in an angry rage, busted through the doors, and went to the throne room. But before Air even got there, when Nightmare teleported back to the castle with Ink in it and the child in his arms, he shoved him in a cage and took all of Ink's weaponry away from him, so Ink couldn't use it against him. His paint, his giant brush. He even took his scarf just in case if something were to happen. Pretty much, Nightmare was being very paranoid. He put the baby in a separate cage, but still in the same room with Ink, so they could still be there, and he wouldn't have to be trying to find each room where they were in. But he was still happy that he was finally able to get his revenge. A few minutes after that, Ink started to wake up from his unconscious state and started freaking out when he noticed he wasn't in his house anymore. He was in Nightmare's castle. And then he noticed that Lion was in a little cage right across from him. When he tried to get over to him, his hands were shackled to the wall. But to the point where his hands could still touch the ground, he just couldn't move to a certain point. He was scared. He didn't want anything to happen to him, his child in him, or Lion. Hurry, please, Ink said in a scared voice. A few hours had passed, and that was the time Air reached the castle. All you could hear was the scream of Air screaming Nightmare's name. Nightmare! Nightmare was chuckling. So you finally made it. Did you like the little present I left you back at your house? Air was angry. He looked at Nightmare with angry eyes and started to say, "Where are they?" "They're fine, but somewhere you will never find them." Air started to get really mad. A few seconds later, Air attacked him. Of course, Nightmare started dodging and fighting back. A few minutes later, down in the basement where Ink and Lion were being held, Ink could hear the fighting and screamed Air's name. "Error!" Air didn't hear them, but he knew that they were somewhere in the castle. After almost 2 hours of them fighting, Nightmare started getting weak. "I won't lose. Not to you." Of course, Air was still really powerful. He took Nightmare's soul secretly, not letting Nightmare know he had it. When Nightmare finally realized that his soul was gone, and with Air, he was so screwed. And then a few minutes later, after Air started telling him how he wanted his family back, and if this was the only way he could do it, he would. He killed Nightmare by stabbing his heart with one of his bones. Nightmare finally was dead. Air started running around the house, or the castle, trying to find where Ink and Lion were. And then he saw the basement door. So he went down there and saw Ink lying down on the cage with a high fever, and YN sitting in another little box on the other side of the room, scared, crying out for Ink. "Ink, are you okay?" he said on the other side of the bars. Ink was unconscious, so he couldn't really say anything. Air used his gaster blasters to blast open the door and get to Ink and YN before anything happened. He was able to free YN and get him to Ink. When Air went to go check on Ink was scared, had a high fever, and looked like he was in a lot of pain. But little did Air know is that Nightmare also attacked, injured Ink's soul in the process, which almost could have led him to a miscarry of the baby. But lucky enough, Ink was able to save it and somewhat use up his power that he had left to heal himself, but it bothered his body a lot and made him fall unconscious with a high fever. Ink, can you hear me?" Ink started to wake up from his unconscious slumber. "Air, where's YN? Are they okay?" "They're fine. I'm gonna get you." It's me.